and welcome to Food Service with a Heart, a new podcast series by Food Service Consultant Society International, FCSI. I'm Tina Nielsen. I'm the editor of FCSI's quarterly magazine, Food Service Consultant. In this podcast, we speak to people from hospitality and food service who affect positive change on the world beyond the kitchen. Food Service with a Heart is supported by Vulcan Equipment. Check out their website on www.vulcanequipment.com. In this episode, I speak with Tracy Chang, the chef and owner of Pagu Restaurant in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the woman behind several non-profit initiatives in her local community. So Tracy, thank you so much for joining me for the Food Service with a Heart podcast here. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me here.
So we're talking about chefs and people in the hospitality space that make a positive impact on the society beyond the kitchen. You were nominated for the Basque Culinary World Prize, along with many other examples of chefs who do good. How do you see food service and the hospitality sector? Is there a spirit of generosity?
For sure. I think in just the daily operations of, restaurants, fast casual restaurants as well, but any kind of food service and people service, you're always guest facing, you're always on. And so, choosing to join that industry or choosing to launch a business or start any kind of initiative in that sphere, essentially you're there for the people. Of course, hopefully you like the product and the service that you're working with, but you're there for the people. It's a people business, right? And you're there to make people feel comfortable, to feel at ease, to feel better than the way they came in before. And so that's what we try to do. As much as we say we're in the restaurant business or in the food business, and we of course love, cooking food and cooking food that makes people feel good and happy. So much of the hospitality aspect is about, the way that you made people feel when they came into, your restaurant, way more than it is about the food on the plate. And that's coming from a chef.
Yeah, right. When you refer to making people feel better, I mean, on the whole, you're talking about the people who come into your restaurant and eat your food, and perhaps in hospitality, I mean, your own initiatives have certainly, some of them have been focused on the people who prepare the food, and there's been a lesser degree of attention on those. What has driven you in your own kind of approach to treating the people who work with you in a different way?
Yeah, I think when I really dig deep and I think about the earliest memories that I have about restaurants and about food and about how to make people feel good, and that kind of bigger umbrella of people is not just the people that come to eat, that pay to eat, but it's everyone. It's people who can afford or not afford food. It's people who are making the food and who are the employees. It's everyone, right? We're all people, we're all humans, and we all deserve to eat and we all need to eat. And I think that value, that core value, was instilled in me by both my parents, my aunts and uncles, but mostly my grandmother. She had a restaurant in the late 80s to about 2000 in the Cambridge area. It was called Pagu Restaurant. It was a Japanese restaurant and very traditional, over 100 seats. And my fondest memories, being age 1 through 10 during the lifespan of that restaurant, is watching her move throughout the dining room, interact with her employees, interact with all the different guests who came in. And it didn't matter if you were Julia Child or Yo-Yo Ma coming in. I remember seeing a giant cello case many times in the dining room and kind of running around. It didn't matter if you were those kind of famous characters or if you were someone who came in, every week, or if you were an employee there. She was always meeting everyone with a certain level of, graciousness, openness, what we call hospitality. And I didn't know that word then. And, excited to put food in front of them and to kind of break bread and kind of start that conversation about where are they from, why are they here today? What do they like? And to really, regardless of, again, who you are, what race you are, what level of income you are, everybody deserves to eat. And so I think that core value was definitely a result of her upbringing. When I saw, going to the markets with her in Chinatown, it's not like when she was in the restaurant versus in her home versus taking us to go, to the markets in Chinatown. She didn't behave any differently. She was that person through and through. And I think that's what it is about, hospitalitarians and people who work in the food industry. We're on like that all the time. That's a really big piece of who we are. And, it's not something that you just kind of like a mask or a role or a character that you put on when you have to go to work. And when we started these initiatives to do community feeding, so we started 2 initiatives, Off Their Plate and Project Restore Us, in 2020 during COVID. And so Off Their Plate initially started in March 2020, before the government shutdown was issued in the Boston area as well as on the federal level. And we started because we saw these kinds of, the trends of what was happening in Italy as well as what was happening in China. And we said, hospitality workers, restaurants, the entire essential worker community, even beyond restaurants, ones that are working on the front lines of healthcare, but also in other service industries, we're going to get hit very hard. So what can we do for our people, for our neighbors to make sure that, one, we're keeping everyone safe as possible. And 2, we can keep people, employed and, generating income so that they and their families are okay. We created a model where we were doing multiple things, but essentially coordinating a lot of the logistics was kind of the core of it. And so we connected restaurants first with healthcare centers and hospitals. And so restaurants know how to make food. They have employees. We had to kind of rewrite a kind of handbook of how to operate during COVID times and what was PPE, right? And how to be very COVID safe and, how to maintain distancing in terms of when we were handing off food to folks at the healthcare centers, how to sanitize, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of created this rule book for all these restaurant operators, and then we connected them with the various health centers, and we let them know, okay, here you're going to go on Monday and provide 500 meals. And on Tuesday for dinner time, you're going to make, 200 meals to this other health center. This is your connection there. Please call them when you get there, et cetera, et cetera. And we decided to take that example from what we started in Boston with my restaurant as the pilot for pretty much every case. And we scaled it to 12 cities nationwide, and we fundraised over $12 million to do that. So we've really relied also on our networks of restaurants and really centering BIPOC women-owned restaurants who are going to be the most vulnerable at this time, as well as their employees. Because we all knew that we couldn't survive on takeout alone. But some of the larger restaurants, might have decided to close or, apply for PPP, et cetera. But some of these smaller restaurants, they didn't have those access to capital, and they didn't have the revenue streams that they needed to keep their employees going. So this really was a safety net and a lifeline for them. We were able to work with World Central Kitchen as our fiscal sponsor because, of course, the logistics of raising money as well as getting all the monies out to those small businesses all over the country, over 80 different restaurants, I think, or over 100 restaurants across the country, was something that we had to plan very quickly. And so having partnerships with World Central Kitchen, as well as a local organization in Boston called Commonwealth Kitchen, was super important to get that going. What we also saw, though, quickly was that we got feedback that said, hey, thank you so much for this, warm meal that you provided. I work at this health center in this ER. I do have a full-time job. I'm seeing all these COVID patients coming in. A lot of them are essential workers. A lot of them are out of work. A lot of them will be out of work for a long time because we still don't know what's going on with this, disease. So please redirect your efforts to these essential worker families. And we said, you know what, we can do better. How can we do better, right? And so we started this other initiative 2 months later in May of 2020 called Project Restore Us. And this one we kept locally because it was logistically a bit more challenging. And so what we did was we had restaurants package culturally appropriate groceries for families, for communities of people in need. And these were essential worker communities. And these were the places where our employees were living and working. These were homes where elders and diabetics and folks with a lot of various, kind of more health concerns and dietary needs had to stick to a particular, kind of diet. And they were lacking staples like rice and beans, oranges and apples, and potatoes and onions. And so I went from being a chef who, historically was designing tasting menus and family style menus and, corporate dinners and weddings, to designing these grocery boxes that made sense for Haitian families, that made sense for Vietnamese families, that made sense for Cantonese families. And so we wanted to make sure that these products were lasting, that they were products that people wanted to eat. And again, that brought them comfort and joy and solace in these dark times. It was important for us to visit food banks and to see that while there was plenty of food, there's no shortage of food in the United States. It's not a production question, but the quality of the food, the types of the food, a lot of it is like high fructose corn syrup, high sodium, like corned beef hash. It's like food that will be here in probably 50 years. And I guess you could still eat it, but who wants to eat it? Right. And what does that have anything to do with the Vietnamese diet? Right. And so we went to the people, to the recipients, and we said, what would you like to eat? And it's as simple as that, right? That kind of question is so basic, but oftentimes forgotten in the sphere of food insecurity, where, people just kind of go through their pantry and take whatever is there that they don't want and kind of donate it. And that's kind of the behavior too with a lot of large organizations. And so we found it quite fruitful just to ask that basic question and then work with our supply chain to get people the products that they wanted. And we had an incredible volunteer network with both organizations. With Off Their Plate, we had over 200 volunteers nationwide. With Project Restore Us, we had over 80 volunteers locally. And so the local volunteers for Project Restore Us, they were willing to pack up their vehicles multiple times a week, drop off door to door at these homes. We would have kind of my restaurant turned into a dispatch center where we were calling in, Haitian Creole and Spanish in Portuguese in Vietnamese, et cetera, and just making sure that people were home so we could get them their food. And if they weren't, then we would go back the next day and make sure that they got it. And it was really powerful to hear later that, what we had budgeted as food to last, 4 to 6 weeks was really lasting 6 to 8 weeks. And that going back to these families, not just once, not just twice, was more impactful than just saying, oh, we reached one person once ever during COVID. It was nice to have some repetition because, food insecurity as we understand it is not something new that sprouted up during COVID. It's something that happened before. It's something that happened after. It's something that's ongoing. And having consistency is really key because, we're there to not just feed people in the moment, but to be able to feed them consistently and lift their morale consistently so that they can get back in the workforce, right? So that they can start, making money and start, purchasing their food again.
Was this another fundraising effort that you raised the funds and then bought all the products, or?
Yeah. So we fundraised in multiple ways. We certainly did campaigns with chefs where they were able to, tap into their networks of, various corporate sponsors or various individuals who wanted to donate. We also applied for, state and federal level grants. Yeah, we did, everything to get the word out there and to raise those funds. And Project Restore Us was something that we evolved over time because what we realized was, why don't people in these neighborhoods have access to these basic dry goods of rice and beans, as an example, in their local grocers at bulk? Right. So we were doing 25 pounds to 50 pounds per bag of those items. But when you went to the local stores, well, one, they're tiny. right? So like the Costco's and Market Baskets and kind of really large grocery stores don't exist in these neighborhoods. And, you know, for multiple reasons, I'm sure, right? One is actually the way that the roads are built. The roads are built in Boston such that they are quite narrow and winding versus wide and kind of straight, right? And so it's hard for large trucks to get into these areas. We experienced that firsthand. And so we had to have them come to my restaurant in Cambridge to drop off the goods. But a lot of the recipients were, say, in Dorchester and Mattapan or Everett and Chelsea, and they couldn't go down those winding streets because these are, you know, 18-wheelers plus. And so that's why a lot of those stores exist as these small corner store bodegas that are carrying, you know, 1 to 2 pounds and just smaller packaging of everything, right? And you know, that's something that you don't really know and you don't see as kind of an everyday problem unless you're kind of on the grounds or you're talking to people and just asking them, oh, you know, why haven't you seen a 25 to 50 pound bag of rice and beans before? You know, for them it was like, you know, Christmas or something, right? Their eyes lit up that they could see such a large bag of food. And so one of the things that we did to evolve the program was that we started a farmers market initiative, where we started selling, you know, once the economy opened up again, you know, kind of 2021, and people were back out to dining and vaccinations were available. We evolved the model to include kind of farmers markets and being present at Boston Housing Authority and various just kind of buildings, meeting people where they're at, right? And selling them these products at cost, like $1 a pound. They can buy these with their SNAP benefits, with their farmers market coupons. You know, we're not here to make money. We're volunteer run. We're here to get you this at cost, you know, as get the prices as low as possible and reach as many people as possible.
What drives that kind of social engagement from you?
I mean, at the time, I was pregnant twice during COVID. My kids are 15 months apart. And so besides the feeling prior to that of, you know, responsibility and social responsibility of having to take care of my employees, I don't think I felt it as deeply as when I was, you know, about to have children or having children. You know, just the inequalities and injustices and the basic necessities that are due to all human beings. Maybe that's why I felt like I had to do something then and there. A lot of people said, you know, why don't you just close your restaurant and blame COVID? Why don't you just kind of take a break and have your kids? And I said, well, I'm perfectly capable. I'm having, you know, a very smooth pregnancy. So why wouldn't I be working on this? And, you know, again, it wasn't something that I was trained in terms of cooking. I have some amount of training in that. Management, I have some amount of training in that. I have a degree in finance, but it was organizing people. And I think getting people behind a mission that is not just meaningful, but like I said, is, you know, a basic right that everyone deserves. I mean, that can't be so hard, right? And then just, you know, kind of coordinating these logistics. And at the end of the day, I mean, everyone feels good about the work that they're doing. And it was a little bit different from running a restaurant because in the restaurant, people complain about the food. And it was nice that we weren't really getting complaints about the food. And we weren't really, I mean, maybe here and there was complaint about, okay, maybe we had 1 or 2 complaints about the food in terms of, oh, I didn't want these vermicelli noodles. I wanted the other rice noodles, maybe once. But overall, you know, people were really happy to receive the food that they got. People are really happy to be working together, to be volunteering. Nothing was about money, really. People are happy to donate their money, donate their time. It was a certain kind of teamwork and camaraderie and just coming together of people during a really intense period of need that I haven't experienced before.
And I suppose COVID really brought out the differences in different groups of society. It became really stark. The people who didn't have and the people who did have. we all passed the pandemic in different ways, and surely if the more kind of insulation of financial support could really help you through it.
For sure. I mean, I think it's important to remember and kind of go back, remember the context of this time where, people were locked up in their homes, people were scared, some people were, living alone, or maybe living with, many people and kind of scared because maybe there weren't kind of protocols for their living situations. There was also, the Black Lives Matter movement. There was also the Stopping AAPI Hate. There was a lot of, in addition to COVID, just cultural, ethnic, kind of turmoil and unrest. And I think, the people that we were able to connect with, on the volunteer side, as well as on the recipient side, just felt like everyone was, like I said, kind of on the same team. And it didn't really matter what their reason was for wanting to be there, but they showed up, and that showing up was either in person, physically, carrying 90 pounds of stuff that I designed for them to bring door to door, or showing up and, on Zoom calls for organizing. Yeah, it's like everyone put aside their differences.
Yeah. When we spoke, I guess it was during the pandemic when we spoke about these initiatives you launched. You also talked about how you were able to support the people who worked in your restaurant when they weren't able to use public transport, or it wasn't safe to use public transport. So that time must have brought you a lot closer to them too.
Yeah, I know where they all live. I drove through their neighborhoods every day. We carpooled to work. We went from having originally, I think at that time, about 36 employees, full-time and part-time, and we dropped down to at one point 4 or 5, and then kind of grew back up to 8, 9, and then teens. And we had things to talk about during every car ride. And part of it was understanding, what their experiences were like. They're all, even now, many are Latinx. I would say like 95% are Latinx, are immigrants, are, the first ones in their families to come over here and to probably graduate high school. And yeah, we talked about, their families. We talked about how they were doing, how they got here, why they're here, what they're interested in, what they thought about, the people that we were delivering to. Yeah, we felt a lot closer. We felt like, even closer family. What I was going to say was, so this was happening 2020, 2021. We're now in 2023. And, restaurants are back open. Restaurants who have made it through COVID are back open. We're happy to say that the restaurant partners with Project Restore Us, we had 5 or 6 restaurant partners here in the Boston area, and they are all, up and running. And everyone had to get back to operating a restaurant and kind of switching over from the model of, whatever they were doing during COVID. So takeout and selling CPGs and holiday orders and community feeding and groceries to operating a restaurant again. And so what we thought about, as we were kind of coming out of this was, one, managing, like getting back to a restaurant, but 2, what about all these incredible people that we met, right? There's all these people that we met through Off Their Plate, through Project Restore Us, that were volunteers, that were recipients, that were donors, that were helping us with social media or PR or fundraising, whatever it was. And I mean, collectively, this is like over 400 people on the national scale. And we said, okay, how do we get back to connecting with these people? Because it's not like, you like work so intensively together and then everyone kind of, goes off, right? And we thought, all right, well, there's still this really valuable connection between people who were part of that network and restaurants. And how do we maintain that connection? And so we started this initiative called Roundtable. And what Roundtable does is, we understand that people like to go to restaurants, and they like to go to restaurants because there's good food, there's good drink, there's good music, there's great ambiance, they're celebrating, they're mourning, they're grieving, all different reasons, right? They're meeting up with friends. they're going on a first date, they're celebrating an anniversary, like all these different reasons. And we said, well, why, people enjoyed so much getting to know these local community organizations, right? And what I mean is that when we did Project Restore Us, we didn't just have lists of names of people who need food. We connected with local organizations like Via Aid and Chinese Progressive Association and La Comunidad and La Colaborativa, right? All these existing small nonprofits essentially. And they had similar kind of growing pains and operational pains that a small restaurant business might have, right? So they don't always have all the ability to apply for all the public funding or, operationally be the most efficient. They might have staff turnover, et cetera, kind of like my restaurant. And so, we connected with them and we were able to reach their people. And that was how that operated. And so we said, well, there's this really key opportunity for us to continue connecting all of these dots, all of these people, right? And so we said, this can happen at restaurants. Why don't we turn food and beverage events at restaurants? Sometimes people get all glammed up and do these like black tie events and fundraisers. We're like, well, it's kind of stale, right? Like, sure, they raise a ton of money for some cause, but it's probably for some really big cause that might not need that money and might have, huge amounts in overhead for like C-level executives. And we're super grassroots. And so we decided, like the money should go towards the programming, right? Towards the need. And so, maybe there's a way for us to host these events at restaurants where the restaurants benefit. They get to do their food, they get to do their beverage, they get paid for the event. We find some sponsors in terms of, utilizing our supply chain of like food and wine and liquor and such. And we find, other sponsors that might want to invite some of their corporate employees, et cetera. And then we invite our community. And at these events, they're not just going to have an awesome time with the food and beverage and meet the chefs that are, traveling in from out of town to do this special menu. But there's all these different kind of activation components where they get to learn about local community organizations. And maybe that's related to food security. So maybe we're bringing in some of our, friends from Project Restore Us, but they could also be learning about all different kinds of things. And so we've designed roundtables to be focused on AAPI Heritage Month, with guest speakers coming from, the mayor's organization, guest speakers coming from the local Asian Resource Network. We've designed events like a 200-person plus block party and fundraised for a local youth center. And we had the local youth cooking and barbecuing. And these are folks all coming from single parent homes. And, we created a 7-week kind of camp program for them to learn about cooking and learn about budgeting and grocery shopping. Because as a teenager, you don't really take a class on that, right? And we've done events focused on seafood sustainability, where we bring in folks who are working on kelp farming and oyster farming. And, we saw that our friends at MIT had students who were working on how to utilize kelp in insulation for architectural projects. And so we kind of see all the different ways that the community can connect on certain topics. And we bring in those players to talk about what it is that they do. And so for the guests attending, it's more than just a food and beverage event, but it's a way for them to connect with all these different members in the community. And so we call it Roundtable. It can exist, for 20 people at a roundtable, or it can exist for 200 people at a block party. So, I guess this kind of moral of the story is that, the silver lining of COVID is that we've been able to really dig deeper to understand what it is about the food and beverage and hospitality industry, what it is that, we derive joy from, but also what it is that is like our core value and our mission and our reason and purpose for being in this community. Who are we? Why are we here? Why do we need to be here? Right? As a restaurant owner or as a restaurant. And we're, at this really wonderful location. And we think that, well, then it's our responsibility, right? If we see this point for connection, it's our responsibility to, create this idea, to nurture this idea, to grow this idea beyond just our restaurant. And now to go apply it to other restaurants in other communities so that they can do the same. Because maybe they also did some community feeding during COVID, right? Off their plate, we had done this in 12 different cities nationwide. World Central Kitchen was doing it in even more cities nationwide. And so these restaurants, they have that passion, they have that heart and soul. And to kind of reactivate it in this way is something that to us and to other restaurant owners, I think makes a lot of sense. And so this trip to Portland is that we're hosting our first offsite roundtable at our friend's restaurant at Bar Futo in Portland, Maine.
Very cool. That's a great project. From all these experiences, so during COVID, so launching different projects and the different experiences you have with your staff and the people who worked in the network, what did you learn?
I think we learned something that we already knew how to do, and it was how to gather people. It's just different ways of gathering. I think I also personally learned just how to perhaps better explain like ideas that live in my head. And we also learned as a chef, and a chef that is trained in terms of culinary school, like I didn't really go to culinary school. I went to pastry school for 2 intensive months in France. And a lot of my culinary training is either self-taught or in restaurant and fine dining. Yeah, so I didn't really have this like traditional classroom experience for that. But I think the pastry side of me, you know, many times would just kind of force me into this like perfectionist mindset. And a lot of opening a restaurant and operating a restaurant is being okay with not being perfect, because things go wrong every day. And I think running this kind of operations is kind of similar to that, where, you know, it's not about being perfect. It's about prototyping and getting your idea out there fast and getting feedback and designing and redesigning and reiterating. So much of the process of doing the community feeding, a lot of people had that idea. They didn't know how to execute it. And they came to us and they said, we raised money. What do we do now? We would like to help. And for us, because we were moving at such a quick pace, it was like this level of like discomfort, but being okay with that and knowing that we were going to make mistakes, but also knowing that because it was like such a positive drive and such positive people wanting to do, you know, the right thing and do things well and do things safely. You know, we were okay with making those mistakes, and that's why we were able to get our, you know, products and services out there very quickly. And so maybe that's kind of like a, you know, like a startup, you know, how startups work, right? Like restaurants, opening a restaurant is similar, right? So yeah, I had to relearn that. Different context. Yeah.
Has it changed the way you run your restaurant?
Yeah, I think when I try to train my employees, a lot of my employees have been with me for quite some time, but when I train new employees, you know, I've always since day one explained kind of like the why behind everything versus just the what. So many people come in, they're like, oh, what's on the menu? What's in this? What's in that? But I always remind my employees that the why is very important. And so there's a story behind every dish, you know, there's a story behind why we're located here. There's a story behind why we picked out these kinds of plates, et cetera, and they should care about the why. And I think that when you train your employees to do that, and when they're able to give a kind of more in-depth and dynamic, you know, kind of response to guests there and interact with them in a way that's, you know, really just kind of better storytelling, then people are there for the long run, you know, versus just coming in for a bite, both on the guest end and on the employee retention end. If they understand that there's a greater mission here than just like, hey, come in, come out, eat something great, pay for it, and, you know, be on your way, right? It's more about, oh, okay, like we've put a lot of thought into this. Beyond cooking for you guys, we also cook for our community. And here are the other events, you know, that we have going on. You know, maybe this is something that interests you. Oh, who are you? What do you do? You know, how did you find us? Why are you here today?
Yeah, so it's more of, it's not so much just a transaction, it's more of an almost an exchange of thoughts and meeting new people and making connections.
Yeah, and wanting to listen and really care about someone and their experiences versus, just kind of being their server, right?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, just to finish off, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about feeling like you had a kind of responsibility. I mean, to what extent do you think that the platform afforded to some chefs, not all chefs obviously, gives them a responsibility to affect positive change because they can?
I mean, I think that not just chefs, but plenty of folks in other industries who have a platform, they have a responsibility, they have a social responsibility to put out good information, put out good product, mentor those that come after them, because otherwise, why have that platform? What is it good for? And I feel like I've been asked many times to go on cooking shows and, kind of competition shows. And I've been saying no for the past, 10, 15 years to those, because I always ask myself, well, one, I am really competitive. As much as I am a very collaborative person now, I grew up as a 3-season athlete. I played soccer, basketball, lacrosse growing up, and I played soccer in college, and I'm quite competitive, so I don't like losing. And so I asked myself, well, if I go on this show and I actually win, or, I do very well, even if you don't win, a lot of people get a lot of opportunities thereafter. And I said, well, then what would I do with those opportunities? I think I'm finally at the point now that I'm considering going on something because I think that I have something to say. And I think it's because I've had these experiences that have been, in some ways life-changing, right? In terms of feeling like I have a higher purpose and that I have these experiences that I think that I've created excellent models for, that I think other people can apply to their communities. So I have something to say and I have something to share now beyond, oh, well, I'm good at cooking and I won this show, right? So
Well,
we'll see.
well, we'll watch out for you on the competition on TV. Well, I think that's a wonderful note to finish on. Thanks so much, Tracy, for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you. Take care, Tina.
Thank you for listening to this episode of FCSI's Food Service with a Heart podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Vulcan Equipment, for supporting the series. Check out their website on www.vulcanequipment.com. Please also check out the FCSI website, fcsi.org, for more articles and virtual content. Thank you and have a great day.